Some of you may have heard about the Disney Corporation was responsible for at least one real-life ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists to relax in luxury. It's a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yeah, $30 million. Then they just abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate. And there was even blame on the cast of co-workers saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of this story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it wasn't obviously because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were even legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's palace. Near the beach side of Emerald City Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might remember him from the Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you know it as the classic Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened and pursued by other animals. Mowgli's palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for this project, and there was actually even a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At some point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned, with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for a fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from the Disney Corporation actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear. Well, suffice to say everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area in the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd stormed the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were raised, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspaper were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local news venues came into play, and their opinions were turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk in those millions and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was completed, visitors actually stayed at the resort, the surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with influx tourists and just lost tourists. Then it all stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty damn happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give a second thought about the place since hearing it closed a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so really, I only heard about the rumblings and didn't experience anything firsthand. Then I read this article about somebody who had explored Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he had found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, the face probably ruined by employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking the place. People there just felt just as angry about Treasure Island as the folks did about Mowgli's palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney released their aquarium stock into local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at their merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is that blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since it closed, I figured, huh, might be cool to do some urban exploring at Mowgli's Palace. Take some pictures, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything that I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say that I wasted no time in getting there because honestly, it took me another year after I first found out about Treasure Island to actually getting up and going to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the place, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney website or resource made any mention of that place that had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought about blogging about the place, or even post a photo. None of the local TVs or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was not to be unexpected, since they all had swung Disney's way anyway. They would be out there lauding at his benefit, you know? Recently, I learned that the corporation actually asked Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably that nobody spoke of the resort, but that their words were made inaccessible. So, in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I'd received back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World. And since I'd been there in the late 80s, apparently that was recent, I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in my books and comics from my childhood. I only remembered it months into my research. And even then, it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin where my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants that moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Excuse me, where could I find Mowgli's?" Half of them cussed me, and the other half just flipped me off. The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrown tropical plants that had just run rampage, and overpopulated the area, mixed with the native species of flora that had actually belonged there, and had tried to reclaim the land. As I was in awe when I had reached the front gates of the resort, tremendous monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they might have just been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand paint and letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of some past local or an employee who wanted to make a small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through but not drive. So grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood there unattended, and the ragged amount of piles of brown coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bug-riddled refuge. There was some sort of clash between order and class, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remaining of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was mostly an information booth or an outdoor bar was simply just a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by past vandalism and neglect. The most interesting thing was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in sort of a courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial way towards no one, staring at the empty space with a silly, toothy grin, and his bird shit covered the whole swath of his fur, and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just as open, you could say. They had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors of the gaping maw, when they had been, someone again had painted "Abandoned" by Disney. I wish I could tell you I found some awesome stuff on the inside of the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, and full-fledged secret society of homeless bums. But no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding of the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, decks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this pile, this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to the location that seemed, in my way, interesting. The kitchen was as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with appliances in its place. No expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like really old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cold, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cups of meat. And as I stood in the inside for a moment, I noticed that they were still swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. As I figured that it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stepped on one and caught one that was swinging, clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were much in the same state as the rest of the place. Just like Treasure Island, someone had methodologically smashed and destroyed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There were about a half inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay in there very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sink and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went in there. It's not like there was going to be anyone inside there. All dripped, leaked, and just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have turned the water off long, long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally, I didn't have any time to look around through all of them. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there anyway. I thought there was actually a television or a radio in one room, because I could have sworn I heard what sounded like a conversation going on, though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on my mind. But I could have sworn it sounded like I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. I know. That sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced anyway. Why I thought there might have been something running in that room? Or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the front door of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and wasted the whole fucking trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard I had apparently missed. Something that would at least give you one thing to show for all my trouble. Even if it was just a photograph. There's a lifelike statue of Python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal, right there in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to go down, so light was hitting the object in the perfect way for photographs like this. I approached the python and snapped the picture. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another one. Moved closer again to get the detail of the face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned, and slithered off the pedestal, across the grass, and into 3 little trees that were away from my sight. All 80 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunny spot. Disney had released all of their exotic animals onto the ground. Right on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I read about the sharks at Treasure Island and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away. Even though it had totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. I took a few deep breaths and slapped my own face a couple of times. I was trying to get my head back right after that. I looked for a place to sit down as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline into broken glass, a deadly carpet, or haul myself onto a desk with questionable reliability. I had seen some of the stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a look-see to see if I could at least get some fucking rest. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building, but relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal, once again painted with "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd been accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep somewhat clean. The stairs led downwards, below ground level, using my camera as a flash of sorts. Improvising, I could see the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign, a real sign on the door read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit for 2 reasons. One, a mascots only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. 2, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph, or maybe steal. I had come to the place essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted, because hey, abandoned didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually, that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall where the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay have done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws on the wall. Something apparently nobody had thought of, or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascot's only area was startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second the third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens. There were clocks, even a punch-in clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around. There was even a small break room with an old static-filled television, and long, rotted-out food and drinks on their counters. It was like one of those post-apocalypse movies where they leave everything in a state of immaculation. As I walked through the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascot's only area, the sights became more and more interesting as I went further. Desks and tables were knocked over, paper scattered throughout the floor, and almost melted with the damp floor. And a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force on it. And clothing items hanging on hooks is one of the most disgusting things that happened to me. Simply fell to moist threads when I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dark, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door that said Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured, this is probably where the costumes were kept. And I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I may, at whatever angle I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. That was when a slight popping sound at the door creaked slowly. Inside the room there was completely pitch black. I used my camera flash to look at the light switch, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my senses of excitement when I heard a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had just passed. It took me a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to keep getting brighter and brighter until the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought I would reach their critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and stabilized. That was a good thing too, because I wasn't going to stay in this room with those freaky costumes and pitch black darkness. The room was exactly as I pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers, hung by invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes hung in hangers towards the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the rest, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur of the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey. Black where it should be white, white where it should be black, as normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough to actually without photographing it to the last. I took pictures of the costumes hanging on the walls, upwards angles, downwards angles, side shots, to show the entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces. Some even had plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of those bedraggled character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing would not fall apart in my arms. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked at my feet, my shoes. There was a human skull between them. It had fallen out of the mascot's head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained staring up at me. I dropped the dog head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved on for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked at the back of the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it. You know I had to. I need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when the photo negative Mickey, the opposite Mickey, in the middle of the room started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood there in the center of the room, the fake face just staring directly at me. No. Over and over I mumbled. With shaking hands, I violently thrashing the heart and legs that had just once turned to jelly. I managed to lift my camera and aim at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of one thing. It was a perfect silhouette of a Mickey Mouse costume, and the camera moved in my unsteady hands. The dead pixels spread, marrying the screen where the Mickey outline moved to. Then my camera died, went black, and quiet, and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the photogenic Mickey costume. Hey, it said in a hushed, perverted, perfectly executed Mickey voice. Wanna see my head come off? It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy glove-clawed hands through its neck, clawing impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself from a predator's jaws. As it worked in its digits into its neck, so much blood, so much thick, chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard that sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the door of this room, I saw a final message in the metal with thumb and fingernail used to carve it. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures off the camera. I never wrote the blog entry. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not for my life, I knew Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me to get in, and they didn't want anything like that to get out.